Our speaker today. So today is a special presentation from Janine, the sister that has left out from our church, went to university, but she's back here to visit. So Janine came to our church in 2008, and when she was 8 years old, since age of 12, she has served as a pianist for the Sunday worship services at our church. She was baptized in 2013 and served as a leader in our youth group, in charge of youth Sunday worship and activities until she left for college. In 2018, Janine graduated first of her class from Enloe Magna High School with perfect GPA and ACT scores. Her common essay for college application was titled Faith. Despite her mother's strong opposition to her title essay choice, she insisted on using the essay and was accepted by several top universities. She was rejected, though, from one university where she did not use the essay in her application due to her mom's insistence. Thanks, Mom. In May 2022, she graduated with honor from Yale University with a double major in chemistry and economics. Now she's working as a drug investment analyst for a startup pharmaceutical company in Manhattan, New York. And she attends Joy Church in New York. 那我用中文再说一遍。Janine 2008年8岁的时候来到北卡圣经教会，12岁起一直主任教会主日崇拜的钢琴师。2013年受洗，担任教会年轻人的领导者，主管年轻人主日崇拜和活动，直到上大学。Janine 2018年以所有课程满分 ，ACT 满分，学校排名第1，从 Enloe Magna High School 毕业。他申请大学的普通广文，题名叫信仰。尽管被妈妈极力反对，他还是坚持采用了，被多个顶尖的大学录取。唯有一所大学按照妈妈的要求没有采用此文，被拒绝了。2022年5月，以优秀成绩获得耶鲁大学化学经济专业毕业，现在在纽约曼哈顿一家 startup 的医药公司做药品投资分析员，而且在纽约加入了Joy的教会。所以 everybody please give me and help me give Janine a warm welcome and please be respectful, okay?
Thank you for that very nice introduction. I'll introduce myself a little bit and then I'll pray in and then get started. So yeah, I left North Carolina in 2018 when I graduated from Enloe. I also went to Carnegie Middle School and I'm now living in New York. I was pretty involved in church stuff in college and in high school. In college, I led a few Bible studies. I did a lot of one-on-one mentorship. I was the worship leader. I just grew a lot in my faith and made a lot of my closest friends. And I was pretty involved in this church when I was in middle school and high school, so it's really great to see everyone here. And I don't know where you currently are in your faith right now. Maybe you've been going to church your whole life, but you're not sure if God really exists, or maybe you're here because your friends are here, or maybe you're here because your parents are, but I hope you all just know that God is ready to meet you where you are. But yeah, that being said, I want to pray in first, and then we can get started on the discussion. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you so much for this beautiful day today, and just this chance to come back to my home church in North Carolina. I'm really thankful for all the people who supported me as I was growing up, and I'm so thankful for every person that's in this room today. And I just pray that you would bless this discussion, God, and that you would bless us as we go throughout the rest of our weeks as well. In Jesus' name we pray.
Amen.
So I was asking everyone what topic they wanted me to discuss, and it seemed like the most popular one was the topic of sort of balancing faith and going to church and also academics. And this is a topic that's definitely really near and dear to me, and I'm sure it's really applicable to all of you as well. I'm sure you've all thought about it as well. whether you just started middle school or you're going to be going to college soon. And yeah, as that introduction that I was given might have clued you into, I cared a lot about my grades growing up. Doing well on AP exams, doing well on standardized testing. I was really involved in Science Olympiad too. That was like my whole life in high school. So yeah, I was pretty busy, and I think none of that is a bad thing. It's often a really good thing, but at the same time, I was thinking about how to honor God with my life and keep serving God and keeping my relationship with God a priority. So yeah, that's what I wanted to talk about today, and as I talk, please interrupt me with any questions that you have. I don't know, maybe like raise your hand or something if you have a question. I definitely want this to be an open discussion and not just me talking. So just a question that I want to pose. I was going to have people answer this, but I think there are too many people here for everyone to answer, but just, I think it's helpful to think about what challenges to faith you encounter are as a middle school student or a high school student. Like, what are maybe the top 1 or 2 things that are barriers to you practicing your faith or having a relationship with God? I know one thing for me when I was growing up is just like, oh, I don't have time. I think that's a barrier that a lot of people run into. But think about what that might be for yourself. It might be something different. But I think no matter what your barrier is, it's important to keep in mind why you want to seek God first, because it is hard to make the time to go to Bible study, go to Sunday service, and that'll only continue to happen when you go to college, when you start working. I'm sure as a parent can probably attest to when you have kids. But something that I thought about when I first started college a lot is, like, what is even the purpose of church events? Because I could easily just skip church on Sundays and keep my relationship with God the same. Like, what if I have a test I need to study for the next day? I remember in high school, like, during AP exam season, I would have like 5 AP exams during a certain week, and I'd be like, okay, I can just like skip church on this Sunday. But I think for me at least, because of how important my relationship with God is to me, one of my main goals growing up and in college was that I would use that time to grow my relationship with God. And I think also consistency is really important. Like, it's easy to think that you're just skipping one thing, but then you end up never going out to anything and then just neglecting your relationship with God entirely. So I'll dive a little bit into what that was like in high school. I think especially in the later years, I really tried to keep church a priority. But at that time, obviously, I was also trying to get into a good college. That was probably the #1 thing on my mind. Maybe you guys can relate to that. But it was still important for me to come to church every Friday and Sunday because it signified the priority that faith played in my life. So even when my life was really busy, I think that's when it's even more important to make room for God. And that's something that I think has really stuck with me throughout college as well. But something that I want to point out is that it's really important also not to be legalistic or to not shame yourself or other people. I feel like it's really easy in church circles to be like, oh, this person never comes to church. Like, I wonder why. Like, they must not care very much about church. But the truth is you never know what's going on in someone's life and what their relationship is with God. So I would just advise you to be really cautious about that, and also just don't shame yourself either. Don't be like, oh, I haven't gone to church in a long time. I don't know if I can show up on this Sunday. I think God just really cares about your heart. And then also, I think an important part of going to church is just the importance of Christian community. Like, if something happens at school, I think now I know I can turn to my friends who have really real relationships with God and who can give me like really good biblical advice. A statistic that I always like is that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. So if you think about who those 5 people are, you want to think about who do you want to be more like. Will those people push you to love others better and to love God more? I think that's what I think about when I think about who I want to surround myself with. And I think going to church really helps me find people who are like that. But yeah, does anyone have any questions about that? Yeah.
Thank you. This was fantastic for me, actually. So yeah, I actually have a question regarding, because you keep mentioning like you want to keep the is your relationship with God, right? So how do you tell all the adults or all the, maybe youth or even smaller kids? Sometimes maybe there's a difference between priority with God versus a variety of church events. I think you have already touched upon that. So sometimes you don't want to shame others, or you don't want to shame yourself for not being able to show up at times. So I know some kids, they might be under pressure from their parents to show up, and a lot of times they show up, but they end up, for that event, they did not really grow their relationship with God. So this I know that they happen in a lot of kids actually. Sometimes the adults too. So I don't know if you can, that's my first question. The second question is, I was really curious, when did you start to even think about all these type of things that I feel like I was not able to even able to think about these until probably in my late 30s or 40s. So this is fantastic.
Yeah, thanks for the questions. To answer the second one first, I think I started thinking about this a lot near the end of high school because I started to get really, really busy. And sometimes my friends in high school would even ask me, like, why are you going to church on Sundays for like a few hours? Isn't that a waste of time? I remember very clearly this one time, I had an AP exam Monday morning, and I was still at church the day before, and then everyone was like, why? Like, why would you do that? So I wanted to think very clearly about why I was doing it, not just to sort of put up a show, like, oh, look at me, like, even though I have a test tomorrow, I can come to church today. Like, I'm such a good Christian. I think that's the wrong mindset to go about things. So to tie that back into your first question, I think it's a really hard balance that I still struggle with now. And in college, especially my senior year, I was very busy serving in church that sometimes it started to feel like an obligation to go to church events, and my relationship with God wasn't growing. So I think you have to keep in tension two different ideas. One being, I want to grow my relationship with God, and I want there to be joy in that, but I also want to be disciplined. So I think for me, a really important characteristic of God to remember is that, like, God's grace is enough. I remember when I was I'll talk about this more later too, but last year in college, I was sort of feeling like spending time with God was becoming an obligation. And I was like pretty good about reading my Bible every day at this point, like praying, but it started to feel like a really big obligation to me. So someone who was discipling me was like, what if you just didn't read your Bible for 2 weeks? And I was like, oh no, I can't do that. But then I think what that pointed me to was like tying what I do for God with how much God loves me, which is totally the opposite of the gospel, right? So I think it's important that God's grace is enough for you, and that God's love really is unconditional. And that's something that you probably all know, but I think like to really know that at a heart level and to believe it is something different. But yeah, I think that those are like some ideas that are important for me.
Yeah, thank you. This was fantastic.
Yeah, so I'll go on, but again, please feel free to interrupt if you have questions. Another question that I really like to think about is how do you practically honor God with your studies or academic life? Because I think one really important part of being faithful to God means being faithful in your current calling, which for most of you is being a student. Like God put you in that place in your life for a reason. And also just remembering that God cares about your academic life because God just cares about your life and God cares about what you care about. A couple of verses that I always really like are Colossians 3:23, which says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men. And then 1 Corinthians 10:31, this has been my lock screen for like 2 years on my phone. So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do all to the glory of God. And I really like those verses when I think about what it means to honor God with my academics too, just in every area of my life. So it isn't about choosing one or the other. Like I feel like there's often this false dichotomy that's framed like, oh, I need to either be like be going to church every week or being a good Christian, or I need to be a good student. But I think it's like, you honor God by being a good student too, as long as you have the right mindset. So I think it's important to think about God in these academic contexts or in these not explicitly Christian contexts. Some practical ways to do this. Just praying more. I remember some people in college said that they would like set 30-minute timers when they were studying to pause for like a few minutes and pray. I was like, that's like a really cool idea, because I think that reminds you like about God and why you're studying in the first place. And then something that also some of my friends and I like to do is like when you're feeling really overwhelmed when you're studying, just setting a 5-minute timer to be still in front of God and just like try not to think about anything in those 5 minutes. It's surprisingly difficult, so I like definitely recommend trying that at some point. And then also just remembering that studying and learning is learning more about God's character. So an example of a time that this was really helpful for me, in my junior year of college, I was taking this class called physical chemistry. It was just like absolutely awful. But when I was studying for these tests for this class, I would be like, okay, this is actually kind of cool, because as I'm learning more about chemistry and like quantum mechanics, I'm learning more about the way that God created this world to be, and I'm learning more about God as a result. And that's just like a really cool way to think about learning science, for example. And like if you're learning history, you're learning about the way that humans have interacted with each other, and you can maybe see God's hands through that. So like no matter what subject you're studying, you're learning more about God, and I think that's really cool to keep in mind as well. And then one of my favorite verses that I actually stuck like right in front of my desk in my last 2 years of college is Ecclesiastes 2:24, and it says, "A person can do nothing better than to eat and drink and find satisfaction in their own toil. This too I see is from the hand of God." And that's kind of a depressing verse, like when you're really struggling, it's from God. But I think when I was like in the midst of college and like always so stressed and studying for exams, I would remember that all of that is a gift from God. I think that was really helpful too. And like for me, I was like lucky enough to go to this college that I really loved, and I think it was easy to lose sight of how much I wanted to go there. But when I read this verse, I'd be reminded of just how lucky I was to be studying these things that I really liked to be studying, and just how all of that is a gift from God as well. And like even in high school, it's like a gift that you can go to such good high schools that are like in this area, and that you can have like really good education, and like that's something that a lot of people in the world don't have. So I think it's important to remember that that's a gift from God as well. And then also remembering that God is the one who gave you your intelligence, and there's a lot of verses in the Bible about stewarding the gifts that you have. So that's something that you definitely want to do as well, is like remembering that by being a good student, you're honoring God, because like God gave you the capabilities to be a good student. God gave you your mind. And then lastly, it's important to remember that you should know your limits, and ultimately academics should not be an idol, and I think that's really easy. I think that definitely happens to me growing up, where there were times where I prioritized getting into a good school more than my relationship with God, just because that's sort of what's right in front of you, and it feels so important. And it is important, but ultimately, like, God is the most important. But also there are more important things in life other than getting good grades. Like, for example, loving people well. I think, like, at the end of your life, you're not going to remember, like, oh, I got a B in this class in high school. But you're going to remember, like, the friends that you made. And I always try to remember that throughout college. Like, sometimes I had a midterm the next day and I should have been studying, but I would, like, be having a talk with a friend. And I would remember, like, at the end of the day, like, when I graduate from college, am I going to remember this, like, if I get, like, a C on this exam, or am I going to remember this friendship that I made? And I think, like, ultimately you're going to remember, like, the relationships that you have with people, and that's what's most important to me, at least. And then another practical example is, like, say you have a friend that's going through a breakup. This, like, happens a lot in college. Like, things always happen. But then you have a midterm the next day that you need to be studying for. Like, yeah, hopefully you've, like, done enough studying already. But I think for me, like, as I got towards the end of college, I realized, like, how much more important it is to like be there for that friend rather than me like studying so I can get like a 100% on this exam, you know? Like I think loving people well is so much more important than your grades. Yeah, any questions about that? Or thoughts?
So Janine, do you feel like you now have the liberty to do that because your moms are not around anymore?
Oh, like my parents?
No, the point about getting the grades versus caring to a friend.
I think in high school I cared a lot more about my grades than I did in college. And I think that there's also wisdom in knowing when things matter and when things don't. I think in high school the truth was that my grades did matter more than my grades in college mattered. So I think it's important to think about that as well. But also I think getting good grades in high school was definitely like overplayed in my mind. Like so many of my friends like weren't as stressed as I did and they went to great schools. But for some reason in my head, it was just this thing that was hammered into me, maybe just like growing up in an Asian American household. You guys can probably relate to that. Like, just the expectation is to get an A, but I think throughout college that I was able to see like more clearly what is more important in life than doing well in school, I guess. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts?
Janine, you were extremely successful. And thank you for sharing how you balance faith and academics. For some of us, we might be thinking, well, it's easy for you to say that because you're very smart and you always succeed. And can you share maybe a time that faith actually got in the way of you trying to get something and that was too late?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think it definitely is very easy for me to say all these things in hindsight because it like worked out for me. I think one practical thing that I like to do, okay, this doesn't directly answer the question. I'll try to more directly answer it after I talk about this example, but something that I did in my junior and senior years of college that was really orienting for me was that I kept a Sabbath every week. And I'm sure you all have like heard of the idea of what Sabbath is, like rest on Sunday. But what that meant for me in college was that on Sundays, I didn't do any schoolwork at all. And if you're a college student, you know like how crazy that is. Like one day when you're not doing any schoolwork at all, like usually when someone talks about doing this, it's like you're out of your mind. Like why would you not do work for an entire day? But what I did that for was that I really wanted a day to, first of all, like truly rest, because in college you really never get that. And then second of all, a day where I can really focus on God and focus on just like having fun with my friends. And I think that required putting a lot of faith in God because you're setting aside this entire day, and most weeks I did not have a whole day to set aside. Like I could not afford to, but I still would because I want to give that time to God. If you've heard of like the first fruits offering in the Bible, or tithing is also a very similar idea where you're giving an offering of your money. It's like sometimes you want to give a little bit more than you even feel you have to give because that really like shows, that really pushes you to put your trust in God. So by setting aside this day, I would say like, okay, God, I'm trusting that you're going to provide enough time for me to study, even though it doesn't feel like it. And I think like that's one way in which like my faith probably, maybe I didn't do as well as I could have if I was studying all the time, but I think that was like really, really helpful for me in my last 2 years of college. But yeah, to more directly answer the question, well, I think like in my senior year of college, for example, there were definitely times where I was like a pretty bad student because I wanted to prioritize like serving at church. And again, like going back to what I said about discerning like when something's important and when it's not, at that time I already had my job offer in New York City, so I knew my grades weren't very important, so that's like when I knew I had the liberty to not be a good student. But I think like when I knew I had to be a really good student, I really did try to, because like what I was saying earlier, like that is part of honoring God as well. Like I think you can totally study very hard and it's not an idol as long as you're keeping God in mind. Like with those practical things I was saying earlier, like, you know, praying often, thinking about why you're studying in the first place. I'm not sure for me if there was a time when faith like directly got in the way of me being a good student. Because for me, there's just like really not that like false dichotomy in my mind, like faith or studies. It's like always been so integrated, or not always, like I think ever since college, it has been like so integrated in my mind. And I think that mindset also really helps. Yeah. Any other questions or thoughts?
I want to ask you how the time management. You have a lot of things to do in your high school. You need a science Olympiad, you have a church event. You also have swimming, right? Am I correct?
Yeah, I swam for my first 2 years in high school.
Oh, the high school, okay. Then how do you manage all those priorities? You know, how much, actually I'm curious how much sleep you can get every day. So that way we know like how you prioritize your time. You know, I guess you manage your time really wisely. When you study, you do very effectively. If that's the case, how you do that? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, whenever people ask me about advice for high school or for college even, often my number one piece of advice is get enough sleep. Because that's something that's so important to me, getting enough sleep. In high school, yeah, I went to ENLA, which like starts pretty early. But I would always try to get at least like 7 hours of sleep per night. Always be asleep by 11:30 midnight. Because I think sleep is something that's really important for your productivity the next day. If you don't get enough sleep, then the next day you're going to be studying, but like falling asleep, so you're not going to retain things very well. And then it's just like less efficient overall. Like it would just be easier to have more sleep. And I think also something I learned in college is sleep, kind of like Sabbathing, is an act of surrender to God as well. Like there were some times where I did not study as much as I wanted to, or there were some times even when I like, did not finish an assignment, but it would be my bedtime, and I would be like, I'm just going to go to sleep now, because I think that is more important to me, that my health is more important to me than getting good grades for sure. And yeah, so that all to say, I feel like sleep is like number one priority, and just like your health is number one priority. And then as for other time management things, I feel like I do work pretty quickly. So I feel like time management wasn't too difficult for me in high school, even though I was pretty busy. So I don't know if I have good tips on that. My mom just like trains the perfectionism out of me when I was growing up. Yeah. But I think like one way to be more efficient and like just going back to this idea again is like knowing what's important. Like for me, if there's like a class that I don't care that much about, or like I know I already have a really good grade in, then maybe don't try so hard on that assignment, even though like you know you can get 100 on it if you try hard. But if there's like a class that you're struggling more in, and like a class that's more difficult and you have a big exam, maybe like devote more time to that. I also like am not that big of a procrastinator, so I think that helps with time management. Just like doing things more ahead of time, and just like being very scheduled and organized, I think really helps. Yeah, let me think about. I feel like high school feels like kind of a long time ago, even though it was only 4 years ago for me. Yeah, I think high school definitely did feel pretty busy, but like my biggest thing was like I'm not doing any work after 10 p.m. Like I'm getting home, like when I had swimming, going to like swimming practice. If I didn't, I would just like start doing work, and then I would be done at 10 p.m. Like even if I had assignments not done, or if I had a test that I wanted to study more for. And I think like setting deadlines like that for yourself and like doing Sabbath in college, like actually makes you more productive too. Like in college, when I knew I wasn't going to be doing any work on Sunday, on Saturday I'd be like, okay, well there's a lot I need to get done today, and then I would get it done like really quickly because I knew I needed to be done by the next day. And then same in high school when I like set this rule for myself, like I'm going to be done by 10 p.m. every day no matter what. Like you're a lot more productive when you like have less time. Like I feel like work often expands to fill the time you give it. So if you have less time, you might be surprised at how efficient you can be. Yeah.
Mr. Kaufman. So for the youth, please, if you do have questions, don't be shy asking, because this session is really for you guys. So just any questions, don't be afraid to ask.
Thanks, Jeannie. I guess my question is from the parents' perspective. So what are the influences that you receive from your parents, both positive and negative, that meaning that you wish all the parents should have done or should not have done?
Also, 这同学 was comments also.
我说中文好了啊。有一句话，前面刚刚也讲了，神的恩典是够用的，不管是在你的身上，在你的孩子身上。所以我回想我的经验，就是我还应该更多的 relax， 在后面 be a supporter, not a pusher。这是给 parents 的 suggestion。Be supporter, that means I'm here. You need anything, come to me. I'm not going to come to you to push you. You're always there if they need any help. But you're not going to, you do this, you do that. Why you not get 95? Why you only get 90? 这些事情就别做了。神的恩典是够用的，神在你的孩子身上一定有他的 purpose， 所以你要 be more relaxed。中国的家长很多太夫媳，包括我自己。今天早上我还在跟姐妹谈的，我说妈妈没有20个你每个课要考多少分儿，然后我们家女儿马上说了一句，她说妈妈你要求我SAT 要考满分的，就是你嫌我没有考到满分，第一次她没考到满分，确实的，作为一个 parent 就是我的 lesson learn。Be more relaxed。你 relax 了，你的孩子就会 do better。你 more tense， 你的孩子就会更紧张，就不会 do better。这是我的经验了啊。
Yeah, I feel like that's pretty good. I feel like my parents generally were, like, I don't feel like I got much of a negative influence on them. I definitely did appreciate that my parents didn't really, care what grades I got in high school. All of the pressure to get good grades in high school was definitely from myself. I think I did feel pressure to get into good college, though. And I don't think that's necessarily bad. I think sometimes that was motivating, but then sometimes I think that felt discouraging as well. But yeah, I think like my mom said, just being a support to your kid, not doing things for them. For example, I feel like something that happens very often is someone's parents will come to me for advice for their kid. But I think what is more helpful is if the kid comes to me for advice, which a lot of people in the youth group have done. And I always really like it when people message me and ask me for advice. I really appreciate it when someone does that. But I think when a parent asks me for advice, I'm a little bit more wary because I'm I don't know if the kid even wants this advice from me. Is the parent just gonna go to their kid and say oh, Janine said this, you need to do this, and then they're just they're probably not gonna listen to it. But if they're coming to me for advice, I think that's often going to be more well received because they're the ones asking for advice. So I think just not feeling you need to do everything for your kid maybe. Also in high school, my mom was very stressed about my college essays, for example, and she would go to all these webinars and stuff and seminars about how to write a college essay, and I'd be Mom, I can handle it myself. And I don't think those were helpful whatsoever. Can I say that? I don't think they were helpful really whatsoever because I ended up writing it all myself. But I think what is more helpful is if I went to my mom and I was I would love to bounce off some ideas with you for my college essays, what input do you have, rather than her imposing things on me, which she didn't do. But I think that's just a general mindset that maybe is helpful for parents to have. But I also understand as a parent, it must have been so stressful for my parents to watch me go through that in high school. Your kid has a lot of potential and you want to see them go to a school that they're really happy to go to. So you that's why ultimately you're putting pressure on them, is because you know that you just want them to be happy. So I know that that must be really difficult too. But I think maybe trusting God, that God is going to step in where you can't, might be helpful too. But I'm not a parent, so I don't know. Yeah.
So I'm applying to the college next year. I was wondering for the Common App essay, was that the main essay you wrote with the fake title one?
Yeah, I wrote my Common App essay about faith and science. Yeah.
And also would you recommend adding a little bit of faith to my essays, or is that not a good idea?
I'm not a very good writer, I feel like, so I don't know how my advice is when it comes to writing college essays, but I think just being true to yourself is the thing that's the most important. I remember I was able to read the feedback that the Yale admissions officers gave to my essays, and they didn't really write much, but they were just she seems like she was being really honest to herself, and I think that's what's important.
Wait, else what was your essay mainly about? More specifically?
I just sort of wrote about my experiences reconciling faith in God and also my interest in science. And I think that was interesting because if they were just looking through my common app, they would see that I was really involved in Science Olympiad, for example. I was applying as a chemistry major, and they would also see that I was really involved in church stuff. So I sort of wanted to write this essay to explain that. And I think it was also something that was really at the forefront of my mind. I think some of you might have been middle school when I was a senior, but in youth group I feel I often ask questions about science, how old is the earth, things like that. I was really interested in that at that time in my life, so I feel it was natural for me to write about it as well.
But one last question, it's kind of silly, but what was your high school GPA?
My high school, I'm not sure what my high school GPA was. I got all A's though in high school, and I took a lot of AP classes. I don't know how many. My mom was trying to count them, but I was I don't remember this period of my life anymore. I think I blocked it out. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
So you said that your parents didn't put a lot of pressure on you, right? And so a lot of the pressure came from yourself. Is that correct? So how did you motivate yourself to get things done? Because I just want to sit and watch TV. I don't want to.
I think I definitely felt the same way in high school. I often just didn't want to do things. I think how I motivate myself to get things done is doing things that I enjoy doing. So, for example, in high school, I really didn't do that much outside of school. I feel I saw a lot of my friends doing so many extracurriculars, doing these math competitions and debate and Science Olympiad and History Bowl, and I was kind of freaked out by it because I was I'm not doing this many things. Am I going to get into a good college? But I think because I was only doing things that I really loved doing, it was pretty easy for me to put a lot of effort into them. Science Olympiad, I loved Science Olympiad so much. I was obsessed with it in high school, so it was easy for me to put a lot of effort into doing it. And I think also I would try to take, I know in high school you don't really have that much of a choice over what classes you take, but just trying to take classes that you're more interested in, I think that really helped me do better as well, because then it's you want to study, or okay, maybe not want to study, nobody really wants to study, but it's less painful to study, and when you're studying you're oh, this is actually kind of interesting. So I think that's also one piece of advice that I often like to give to high school students is don't do a billion things, and half of which you are not even interested in, you're just doing because you know it looks good on the college application. Do things that you genuinely love doing, and I think that really shows in your application, and then that makes your life happier too, and then you don't have to think as much about motivating yourself to do things you don't want to. But of course there's going to be the classes that you hate. I hated a lot of classes in high school probably, but I think I just would try to remember that it was pretty temporary. Ultimately it's just 1 year, even if this class I really dislike, if I just get through that year, then I can go to a college that I really like going to, and like take classes that I actually want to. So just like also framing that perspective of keeping the more long-term in mind maybe helps as well. I don't know, I probably have like more study tips too, but I feel like that's another discussion. Yeah, but I think just like keeping perspective is like the main thing in terms of motivating yourself. Like, why are you studying in the first place? Like, if it is just to please your parents, that's not going to be sustainable in the long run. If it's like intrinsic motivation though, then I think that is like a lot more lasting. So just like finding what that intrinsic motivation is.
If nobody asks questions, let's go.
I haven't missed this, but how do you get connected with a campus ministry?
Oh, yeah, that's a really good question. And I can like talk a long time about that too. Like my faith journey in college is a whole other story, but I went into my first year, I knew I really wanted to get involved in a campus ministry, so I was pretty intentional about that going in. I ended up joining one where I would go to the Bible studies every week, but I didn't end up getting very involved other than that, and that left me feeling sort of dissatisfied. And this is a very abridged version of what happened. But then in sophomore year, I ended up going to the winter retreat of the fellowship that I ended up really sticking with. And I really, really liked that fellowship, and ended up getting like super, super involved in it. And even now, I'm going back to the winter retreat in a few weeks to just hang out with everyone again, because I like made so many close friendships and like mentorship relationships. But that's like, definitely something to think about if you're going to be going to college soon, is like, what do you think you're looking for in a campus ministry? For example, the one that I ended up sticking with was like majority Asian. I don't know if that's something I really thought about going in, but I think that was something that was helpful for me because I felt like I connected with people more easily. Also, it was a campus ministry that was very focused on justice initiatives, and that was something that was important to me as well. And it's like a campus ministry where students are very, very involved in planning everything. It was less like top-down leadership, and that was also something that I really valued.
I have a question. Hey, Janine. I know Janine since Janine was a baby for many years. It's really great to see you grow, to have the maturity, to be able to share with so many people. My question is, what did the faith really play a role in your journey? If you didn't get a chance to go to Yale or any top school, do you still feel the worst? How do you practice? Basically, I think we have many people here, more than any other time I see the youth here, and the parents. The question is, if you didn't go to top school, what do you think?
Yeah.
Do you still feel the same or you feel different?
I think that's a question that's like really hard to answer because I did end up going to a school that I really liked. So I feel like it's like easy for me to say like, oh, it would have been worth it even if I didn't go to Yale, but I don't know if that's truthful or not. But like, I think at the end of the day though, like my relationship with God really, really is the most important thing in my life, and I mean that sincerely. Like, if I had not gone to Yale, I think I would have gone to a different college where I'm sure I would have found like a campus ministry too, where I met a lot of really close friends. And I think a lot of these themes like still would have popped up in my head of like balancing academics and faith. Because I feel like what I got out of Yale was not the academic rigor at the end of the day. Like, what I got out of my college experience was like the relationships that I formed with people, and you're going to get that no matter where you go to school. And I think like the reason for that is because I kept the perspective of like my relationship with God is the most important thing in my life. So that is going to like sustain me no matter where I go to school. Like maybe I wouldn't have liked classes as much if I went to a different school, but I think I still would have found meaning elsewhere. And it's like that verse, like in Matthew 6, where it says seek first the kingdom of God and the rest will be added onto you. Like I think if you're seeking first the kingdom of God, even if in the moment things feel very dissatisfactory, I think things will always work out in the long run. Like, okay, it's like even from like people who, like my high school friends who like did not end up going to the colleges that they really, really wanted to go to, I think it really did suck at first, maybe for like a year or two when they were in college. But like all of them are very happy now and like doing what they like, great jobs, they made good friends in college. Like it's all going to work out. I think like trusting God is like not even like it's worth it, but it will help you through that too if you end up not going to the college that you want to go to, I think, yeah.
Thank you so much. I think this is truly honest answer. I like that. Another follow-up question, sorry I'm taking more time, is about sleep early. I think you comment on go to bed at 10 o'clock. It's really hard. I know, including parents, and some people want to do that, even pray for it, but still cannot have the self-control. Any suggestion for that?
Yeah, I don't have great self-control these days either. Practical tips. Set a screen time limit on your phone. I did this in my last couple of years in college. Like, you know how you can like make a screen time thing like on your phone? It like turns off all your apps after like 11:30 p.m. or whatever you want to set it to. And then you can like request more time or whatever. But one of my friends, what he does is he like sets a passcode. He makes someone else set a passcode for him. So he doesn't know what the passcode is, so he like literally can't request more time. So that's one practical tip, is like have all of your like devices off at 11 p.m. Like set a screen time limit. So like, what are you gonna do? Like if you don't have your phone or like your laptop or anything, like you can read, I guess, but then you're gonna fall asleep like a lot quicker if you're not distracted by things. Another practical tip. For me at least, like if I know I need to get up early the next day, I'm going to sleep earlier too. So like, for me, I actually loved taking the earliest possible class in college, which is like weird. I would say that, and a lot of people think it's why. But like for me, if I have an early class in the morning every day, I'm gonna have a way better sleep schedule than like in my very last semester of college. My first class wasn't until 11:35 every day. That was absolutely disastrous for my sleep schedule. Like, because I knew I didn't have to wake up until like 11 if I really needed to, and that was not good. So I think that those are some practical ways to go to sleep earlier.
Okay, so Ivan has to step outside, but time is up, unfortunately. Ginny, when do you go back to school?
I go back to New York tomorrow.
Tomorrow, okay. Yeah. Well, there's still a bit of time today, but thanks for coming in. Let's give her a round of applause. So, it turns out the session was more for the parents than for the students. But if the students or the parents, any of you have more questions for Janine, I'm sure she and her mom would would love to talk to you more.
Yeah, definitely. If you like want to talk more, I'll be going back to New York soon. But if you like want to email me or send me a text, I'm also like pretty accessible through like Facebook Messenger, through me, pretty much anywhere. Definitely feel free to reach out to me. I love talking to people about these things, and I would like love to talk more about these topics or any other questions you might have about like faith, college, high school, anything like that.
All right, thanks so much, Janine, and thank you, Jing Hong, for sharing your daughter with us today.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.